I was working in the hospital at that particular point. I was doing night chaplaincy. I had been working with the deaf community, and at that time there was a need for night chaplaincy at our medical center. And so for that particular year, I worked in night chaplaincy. So I had an opportunity to visit many people in the evening. And frequently that's when families come, or at the time that I was visiting, there were a lot of people from Gay Men's Health Crisis. So that was one of my first introductions. But during that time, it was just amazing to me how many, what my mother said, holy deaths there were in hospice, just because she was also a Eucharistic minister. And the reverence that frequently came from, people with AIDS was really such a sense of reverence for especially religious visits at that point. My previous experience with the gay community was very much when I went to NYU. And a lot of my professors were gay, and some of my classmates. And in that time, especially later on when we had the quilt coming around, it was very, very traumatic for me to see so many of my friends' names or people that I had worked with. So that had a great impression on me. We had several doctors that were very involved, and one outstanding doctor was Dr. Mullen. And there would be times that we would celebrate World AIDS Day, and it was just such a wonderful, response and interaction, hearing how the impact of a small community hospital had, and how they felt it was like coming home to them. During that time also, I visited one of my good sister friends, Sister Loretta, and she was working in hospice. That was my connection in those years with hospice. And I used to go visit her, but her pastoral skills really rubbed off on me because of her sense of presence and her sense of creativity and working with anyone.
And humor, right?
Humor, very much so. Very creative and very, very tongue-in-cheek at times also.
Such a shining light and such a great sense of humor. And she had so many physical challenges. I don't know when she was, that she had been struck by lightning, at what age that was?
She was fairly young in religious life when that happened. She was actually at our college, and we had those very, very large windows, but they had the lead frames in them. And it started to thunder, and she got up and she went to close the window, and that's when she was struck by lightning. Which really, changed her whole medical system after that. But you were talking about her humor.
Yeah.
Jane, I have a very funny story with that. I went up to visit her. At that time, I was living in West Park, in a town that's not far from Esopus or Kingston, New York. And she was in the hospital, and I forget which one it was, but she had what it looked like. She was attached to an IV, but she really wasn't. And when I looked at the IV bottle, there were goldfish in the bottle. But I mean, she did these incredible things all the time, just so out of the box. I just knew of the organizations that were working with the gay community, and I was just so impressed that, sometimes there wasn't a lot of support for the person with AIDS because of the fearfulness at that time. It was so new. And Gay Men's Health Crisis was just so incredible. And then, I heard about God's love, we deliver. And I knew that that helped people go into the community and to have, nourishment and nutrition that was so needed, for them when they went back into the community. So there was the community and then coming back into the hospital and then frequently after that going to hospice. And at least for the acute stage. And then I just knew that that allowed people to go home in an independent way. It's funny because that was like in the 1980s, and later on when I was working in geriatrics at the medical center again, which was like between 2004, the beginning of 2004 to about 2008, when the hospital was was closing, at least the patient, aspect of it, that I also had a whole other population that was in great need, and that was really frequently the elderly, because we had a visiting doctors program. And so the doctors going in, I as a therapist going in to the homes would find, the missing links. It wasn't just, talking about going home, but it was actually, doing these services within the home, in the hospital, being there as an advocate. And frequently what allowed a person to stay in their own place would be the fact that God's love, we deliver, was so available to us. We called, and there wasn't a lot of red tape like some of the other organizations, and I was never refused, ever, from from God's Love We Deliver, which is so important, because a lot of times people fall through the cracks. A lot of these elderly people had outlived their families, so in order for them to really have this ability, when a home health attendant, because we know that those paid hours are so infrequent, that would really keep them in their own apartment and, not be in a more restrictive environment. So that was very important too. And that went on for several years. And I know the geriatrician that I worked with, Nadia Marsh, was just an incredible, director and chief. And at that time, we also had interns and residents that, worked with us. And so it gave them also that incredible experience of being able to see what the holistic point would be from, doing service in a home, what to look for. And a lot of them would say that it really impacted, even though it was just a rotation, how they would look at people in the future, even if they weren't doing a home visit, but to think of that aspect and call the people in that were necessary. So I thought that was an incredible point.
Beautiful, beautiful. I think I had shared with you that in 1981, a friend and I were in charge of getting books to a course that were in the lower Catskill Mountains, and we were in California. And she had a little Carmen Gia, and those 35 books were in that trunk. And we had 5 days to get across country. And she said to me, Jane, there's only one place that I must go, and that's Mother Cabrini's shrine in Golden, Colorado. And I didn't know who Mother Cabrini was. And I said, sure. And the whole trip, it was like, I'm driving 10 hours, I go to sleep, she's driving 10 hours, the whole way through. But the only time we stopped was at Mother Cabrini's shrine in Golden. And I got out and I saw this exquisite shrine, and I saw people going up the steps on their knees, and I heard that people had major healings there. And I just said, thank you, Mother Cabrini. I don't know why I'm here, but I thank you for bringing me here, and like that, and not really knowing anything. And my friend said thank you, and we got in the car and we hightailed it to New York. And that was May of 1981. And then roll forward, my friend Ganga Stone, that I lived in an apartment, there were 5 of us, Ganga was one of them. She was volunteering at Cabrini Hospice. She said, I think you'll like this volunteer work. I did the training, and we were paired to do volunteer work together. And I was working on Wall Street at the time, and the firm, Sanford Bernstein, where I worked, if you volunteered, you could put in a proposal to their foundation to have money go to the organization where you were volunteering. Mm-hmm. And so $10,000 was given to Cabrini Hospice due to my proposal and my volunteer work. And so Mary Cook, who was the executive director, asked me to be on the advisory board. And I still made through this, from May of 1981, going to her shrine, to training at the hospice. I heard it as Cabrini Hospice. I never heard Mother Cabrini. It just didn't connect. And for some reason, when I went to the hospice, I never saw pictures of her. I mean, how that's possible that I walked through the hospital, didn't see. And now I'm going to the hospice advisory board meeting. It's the second one. And I went a different way. And I'm going through, got out the elevator, I look up and I see a picture of Mother Cabrini, and I get it. And I fell to my knees, I can't believe this is so incredible. You engaged me to be in your service, like one of your modern nuns, Back in 1981, I had no idea, and I've been of your service, and so I just became very still and said, whatever you want, I'm here, and walked into the advisory board meeting. There are usually 20 to 25 people there, and heads of religious traditions, a rabbi and different priests of different traditions, and Mary would always ask one of them to lead us in a prayer before we began. And this time, I was so, what's the word? Just overcome with, I don't know if humility is the word, but overcome with awe, probably awe, that she had, something had happened at that shrine, and that she had engaged me to be of her service, and I wasn't even aware of it. And so I was in this state of awe and attunement, probably. And Mary Cook turned to me and she said, Jane, will you lead us in the prayer? And then every time I was at an advisory board meeting, she said, Jane, will you lead us in the prayer? Because I would always go in and I would say a prayer before I walked in the door. I'm at your service, whatever you want done. So. So I'm very curious, to hear you talk about her faith, her vision, her attunement, because so many of those qualities showed up in God's Love We Deliver. With Ganga receiving the vision of that this was going to be an epidemic, where our being called to it, when she delivered a food pantry bag to Richard, who was on the hospice program and had AIDS, the first person with AIDS. And he was starving and couldn't use anything in that food pantry bag. He only had a hot plate. And she coming home to me and telling me the story, and our shaking hands, that no one who was homebound with AIDS would go hungry in New York City. And when that happened, when we shook hands, it was this very powerful, like lightning, bolt coming into my body. And we both experienced it and knew that this was so much bigger than us. Mm-hmm. And we were just there at the service of what was needed. And so we had, whatever it takes. That was it, whatever it takes. I said for many years that I was the bulldozer. Because there was, as you were saying, no one knew how AIDS was being transmitted, and everyone was scared, understandably. And, we had 400 people die in the program in the first year. I went to many hospital rooms, quarantine rooms. I'm sure where you had to gown up to go in. And Yeah, it was a scary time, although I have to say, even though I remember my parents saying, like, you know, what are you doing? You know, like scared for me, right? And people were scared, like, you're going to get sick. Who knows how this is? I didn't have any fear about that. I was so protected. I just think that's her grace, Mother Cabrini's grace, and all of the divine forces that wanted this to happen.
I think that responding to need,
Mm-hmm.
the way that you've described many people in the organization also, was so much a part of her too. In the back over here we have Pope Leo the 13th, and her dream was to go to China, but we always say she went to Chinatown instead because he encouraged her to go to New York. To be a missionary was her great desire, and there weren't many missionary communities at that time, but responding to a need, and I think the way you're describing it also, Jane, is seeing the person. Mm-hmm. What were the needs of the time? If there was an epidemic of yellow fever, she would go to that place.
Right.
She would be frequently invited, but the response was there. And I think today, even in our congregation, when we're asked to go somewhere, I always say, and many of the sisters always say, is there a need? Mm-hmm. And then there's not much to pray about because you're being asked, and the need is there.
Mm-hmm. So the grace is there.
Response.
That's right. That's right.
And so the grace is there, as you say. The faith is there, and she's always before us. The other thing is, she had a lifetime fear of water, and yet she crossed the ocean 23 times, and founded the 67 missions. 67 years, and she entered when she was 30, so started the congregation. But those articles of faith of, just responding to the needs of what's there, and I think we see this frequently in parts of the world where there's genocide. And our sisters have just recently accepted, the point of going to Uganda now, because this was her 100th anniversary of death. And we wanted to do something that would have been, where a lot of people are afraid to go. But responding to need and seeing the person is what I'm hearing from every single one of the people that you're talking about, and it's so much in her faith tradition and in her charism, that dynamism, that faith that God will provide.
I think that's so true. I mean, even I have had some of the most extraordinary conversations with seemingly homeless people on the street. Or, someone I'm just paying attention and they're picking food out of a garbage can, and I just stop and I talk with them. I had this recently in California, and I saw this man taking food, and I said, "Would you like a meal?" And he said, "Did you see me picking out food?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Yes, I would." And we ended up going to the restaurant together. And it was one of the most extraordinary conversations I've ever had, an enlightened conversation. But I saw him, right? And so I think that's a gift of grace also, to be able to see.
Totally, and I think that type of thing is looking someone in the face or in the eyes, even if you can't provide a lot for them, is to respond to them as a person, which I think is so important. So that was, you're doing this as a missionary today. Still touched by that spirit. And,
Yes.
the spirit that is within you, that is so touched and revealed to other people, comes forth.
Incredible. And that she was a woman,
Yes.
And with a lot of guts. Although, people say a lot, you're so courageous, you had so much courage. I didn't experience it that way. I don't know how you feel, being called to something, it's not even a question about, am I going to do this, am I not going to do it? You just know Yes, right? So it's not about courage.
No, and she always pushed us to the Sacred Heart of Jesus as the center. And I think that's, such an important part, is that she always took the attention away from herself. In fact, the sisters love the Feast of the Sacred Heart. It's the day we make our vows, but many of our institutions, because they're named Mother Cabrini, do this incredible celebration, and we celebrate her. But every time I think about it, I always say to almost every executive director, the really big thing is the Sacred Heart of Jesus, because I know that's what she would have wanted.
Right.
It wasn't about her.
Right.
It was about what she saw in that moment.
Right.
And, that's being carried out today by so many people.
So what
which
was
is
that
gratifying.
moment?
That moment of just seeing a need, seeing a person that we discussed before. She was a mystic, and I think a lot of people here take a look at her activity, and she was very active, but she was a contemplative in action. And that's very inspirational, because that's what fed her. It was the grace of God that fed her, the grace of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, which is really the part of Jesus that shows all of his compassion to the world. And today we have so many issues with immigration, that people come and feel it's safe in this place. They feel this is a sanctuary where they can come and pray and, have a safety. It's not a sanctuary like sanctuary church, but it's a sanctuary in terms of the feeling they receive, her spirit that's so much here from the people that come to pray here. I think when we pray, it stays here, that karma stays. It just, we feel it in many
builds
holy
here.
places.
Yeah.
Not just in Catholicism, but in others, those people that transcend, like Mother Teresa, the Dalai Lama, and in her time, Mother Cabrini, and today, with Pope Francis, there's people of many different religions that, have these charismatic people, and that's what inspires them. What drives them? It's that sense of having that moment to be still, so that they can see. So you're not just walking by someone, but you're seeing the person.
So would you say that the Sacred Heart is the divine spark within everyone?
I believe all of us have an indwelling spirit, within us, just by order of our creation. God made us in his image and likeness, and that goes right across the board. So all of us contain that spirit of God within us due to our creation, whether it's Ruah, the breath of the Spirit, or whether it's Abba, no matter what word we're using, it's that divine spirit within everyone, and I believe it's within everyone. So she was so tiny. She was little.
She was like 5 feet or something? Under 5 feet.
And I recently went to Cadonio, and they have a museum there, and her rocking chair is there, and it looks almost like a child's. She was small. And yet when she arrived here in the United States, and the Archbishop told her that he had written to her probably while she was on her voyage, and there wasn't a need, and as small as she was to this church leader, she said, Pope Leo sent me, and here I'll stay. And I'm sure she had a smile when she said it, but she stayed, and had some very, very tough beginnings, but she used to say that tough beginnings were a sign of future productivity. So, there was always that sense. So that was very strong. Also, being a missionary, And starting a woman's missionary community was not that common in that day. And yet that was something that was very important to her.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she had a lifetime of fear of water, and she crossed the ocean that many times. So those things were not something, you know, that she used to say. There's a saying that she has, it's called obstacles, obstacles. What are obstacles? You know, they're just playthings in the hands of Jesus. You know, and there's this little statue that I remember when I taught in Brooklyn of Jesus as probably around 4 or 5, and he's holding a ball. And the things with those were the little playthings to Jesus. You know, everything is doable. I can do, it's St. Paul, I can do all things in God who strengthens me, happens to be her favorite, you know, saying. And is very, very powerful, because sometimes when you're feeling a little bit anxious about something, she has that prayer. One of the musicians at our concert yesterday sang actually that prayer. She chanted it. She's a medieval and Gregorian, you know, singer, plays the harp, but she put that to music, and it was a great sense of don't be anxious, you know, to have that faith. And that's what people in, you know, God's love we deliver, you know, the woman that you were speaking about that was talking about, you know, it'll happen.
Yeah.
It'll have
Right.
that trust and that faith.
Right.
So.
Yeah.